and how this will have global impact?
So to answer your first question, I feel this is not just a Donald Trump's issue. I think this is an issue coming from the future, what we should expect from international politics or international development. You know, as I said earlier on, countries now are qualitative in their thinking. You know, so countries now are asking questions, okay, we are giving aid, what are we getting in return? So it's not business as usual. You know, so the American people, for instance, because most of this aid comes from taxpayers' money. They are not just donations from wherever it's coming from. These are taxpayers' money, and it means that questions are being asked. You know,
what value are we getting? They are asking questions like, what value are we getting for one of these? Yes.
You know, because I saw I think a message from the director of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, yeah.
Yeah, he was saying that America is the only country, according to him, where taxpayers have been asked to pay money to donate to other countries. He hasn't seen that happening in anywhere in the world. You know?
And to him, that doesn't make sense.
To him, that doesn't really make sense, because what value are they getting? So it is more like qualitative questions being asked. What value are we getting? So I think it is high time that the African continent starts looking inward in their economy strategy blueprints. You know, we should not focus more on what we would get from the international community, because it's not going to be sustainable. We should have a resilient framework that, with or without the foreign aid, African economy is going to be stabilized. You know, and then another issue again, the global downturn.
Right.
You know, it's a big issue, because the world is still struggling to come back. You know, we had COVID recently. We had other issues that are kind of impacting, putting pressures on most of these countries. So they also have their own problems to contend with.
Interesting. You know, I want us to also look at the fact that you can't talk about foreign aid and not look at what they now call soft power.
Yes.
I mean, look at what British Council is doing in Nigeria. Look at several of these development agencies from different countries across the world. All of them have their foot on the ground in Africa. Yes. There's the argument that with this kind of action regarding United States Agency for International Development, it will further weaken the impact of US's soft power across the world.
So I think that perspective is debatable, because some of these countries are focused on value, you know. So it is a future of multilateralism. Gone were the days where most of these world powers would just want to, you know, be in line with African countries just for the sake of it. Some African countries like Uganda, Ethiopia, so these things are happening. So this is not just a US problem, this is not just a Donald Trump's problem, this is where the future of multilateralism is going to. You know, it's going to a place where if you don't have anything to offer, countries will not really involve you in the core decisions making. So I see other donors replicating the same thing. You know, for instance, donors like maybe the EU and other big multilateral donors too as well.
You see, this is quite interesting, because at the end of the day, this action will have impacts that are remarkably negative, if you like, adverse on Africa. There are projects that are ongoing, courtesy of USAID. I mean, 100% courtesy of USAID. What are some impacts? What do you think would be some specific fallouts of this action going forward?
So I think the major impact will be around human capital development. It is unfortunately that the African continent as a whole kind of handed that component of development, the human capital development, to, you know, the international partners or the international community. You know, components of the human capital development involve, say, the health, for instance, education, you know, social welfare as a whole is going to be significantly affected. You know, let's take, for instance, the health component.
Let's take a quick break, everyone. When we return, we'll look at who is speaking up for Africa at this point and what exactly are the rhetorics that they're advancing for the international community to listen to. All of that coming shortly. Do stay with us. Now, there's been the insinuation
why world leaders will behave the way they are behaving to African leaders is because of how we've relied on them for so many things. Imagine, say, our economy is doing well. We have political stability. Security is not a big issue. Even food security is not a big issue.
Right.
At least we kind of have some components to offer to the table, so that when world leaders are talking, we are not just lamenting, but we are talking value. We are having qualitative partnerships and not just venting maybe let's say frustration or something, or maybe raising our expectations too high. Yeah, so I think it's time to act. Let's talk and in diversification and utilization of unharnessed sectors or resources. Africa is blessed. Nigeria is blessed, both natural and human capital, resources. But when it comes to utilizing it, that's the problem. So I think it is high time that more work needs to be done around harnessing some of these resources that are not adequately harnessed. Nigeria is doing so well. Nigeria, as a case study to the African continent, is doing so well around optimization. But I think optimization is not enough. We need to kind of diversify. There are sectors that are not adequately harnessed. So if those sectors are not well harnessed, it's not going to translate into sustainable development.
People keep talking about sectors. I mean, you're talking about sectors that are not adequately harnessed. People keep talking about agriculture. They talk about health, because they say we're not doing a lot with health. They talk about tech. Are we ready for that conversation? Because the world is now talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math.
The technical know-how, that's not a problem. Because the world now is moving a little bit away from mineral resources to human resources, largely around services.
Right.
Yes.
Just a while ago, we talked about USAID, and we said some of the areas they focus on are education and health. And we look at our health sector. Up until this point, we're still debating what exactly is the allocation for education. I mean, look at the budget since, the last 20 plus years. What has been the highest? At the point, former Minister of Education, Malam Adamu, said that we had never done up to 10% in terms of allocation, even though UNESCO strongly recommends 26%. But of course, some people have also argued to say, well, Nigeria does not belong to UNESCO, so UNESCO cannot tell us what to allocate to education. That argument is probably for another day. But what we're saying is, to borrow a word, how do we optimize in terms of education in such a way that we understand that education should be something practical and add value, not just people brandishing several certificates, papers, and all of that. That's for education. As for health, this morning before you took your seat here, my colleague and I were talking about University College Hospital in Ibadan. That's a frontline health facility, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. But how embarrassing it sounds when you read on the papers, sometimes headline stories of how that for days this same facility has not had power. For example, it's something that it just tugs at your hearts, all right? That's number one. Number two is we now have a situation where the Japa syndrome has become a phenomenon in itself. This morning, some paper is reporting that in Nigeria, the ratio is such that you have a case where it's one doctor to 1,800 cancer patients. Yesterday, there was don't look good.
What are the components? Health, education, social welfare. These are components that would affect the most vulnerable. These are components that would affect everyone, not just the most vulnerable. So aside the allocation, because you can't give what you don't have.
Right.
You can't allocate what you don't have. So it is high time that leaders start thinking about how to generate more revenue. Another way to generate more revenue is by cutting down excess.
the South, right? And one of them told me that data is at the very core of our development as a continent, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And he said, but there's a gap that most times we have a problem with data back at home. So domestic data, as they called it over a decade ago, is a challenge. And he gave an example. He says, so if you have, let's say, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Ford Foundation or MacArthur Foundation coming to Africa to say we want to invest in health, let's start with $100 million. If it happens that in that community or in those communities where they are interested in, the prevalent issue there is
really what whoever is coming into.
I can imagine. So let's begin to wrap up now. There have been issues of partnerships, international partnerships. Sometimes you hear the term international strategic partnerships. There are people who have said time and again vehemently that Africa and indeed Nigeria would have to rethink the way it partners with the rest of the world, because they say there's a lot of exploitation going on. That's Nigeria, and of course the entire continent always gets exploited by international partners because of course, the huge deposit of minerals that you have on this continent. What must African leaders do, whether those who are politically appointed, those who are elected or those who are appointed, to help rejig the way we think, the philosophy of leadership and development in such a way that we can also bring our chest, so to say, to the table instead of being at a disadvantage the entire time?
I think in a nutshell, let's have a strategic foreign policy.
Foreign policy, strategic one.
Yeah, a strategic foreign policy that speaks to us, that we can relate to. For instance, the foreign policy in the US is America first.
And they're very clear about it.
And they are very clear about it. Anything we are doing, when it comes to priority, America would come first before whoever is coming to the table. So foreign policy is very, very important.
All right, I think that's where we're going to leave it, everyone. I'd like to say a big thank you to you for coming to the program to actually share with us this morning some of your very valuable thoughts on this issue. I take talking points across not just Nigeria, but Africa, because it's a disruption, and for many countries, it's a shock that they are not likely going to recover from in a matter of days. I've been speaking with an international development economist, KWAJI NGIDA, who has been sharing context, insights, and perspectives on these developments. Again, we appreciate you for your time.
Thank you very much.
This is where we'll take a quick break, everyone. When we return, we'll domesticate our conversation and turn to tanker explosion, finding practical and long-term solutions to this menace. All of that coming up with Queen Agaba and our guest who has a handle on this development. Global Morning is your top morning show here on Global Television.
We bring you fresh news updates daily while delving into a variety of current affairs and topics.
Global Morning aims to deliver newspaper reviews and latest news with experts on key global issues.
And at the same time, keeping you well informed about important events, both national and internationals.
Global Morning serves as a valuable source of information, helping viewers like you start your day well informed.
Stay connected from Mondays to Sundays to a wide range of the latest news making rounds on Global Morning.
We're on the road to protest.
The president meets all of our demands.
This is Global Morning.